Tech by Tips.
Welcome! In this course, we will be covering from the perspective of a beginner the main principles behind programming and scripting. These principles are used not only in PHP but in other programming languages. And we will go over the basic theory and concepts behind programming, from understanding how our computing capable devices work to the abstractions in the instructions we give them. We will learn how to build web applications that are useful and dynamic. And by dynamic, we mean that the content is not static but changes with user interaction and information. We will provide examples for every topic that we cover. That way, you will get better comprehension. And we will use free tools to code, validate your code, and test it. That way, you will be able to learn while practicing. All our code will be in a GitHub repository for your reference. In case you're wondering, my name is Jorge, and I am Tech by Tips founder. I have a degree in computer engineering from the Polytechnic University of Puerto Rico, and I've worked at a big international tech company for the past 7 years. We work with the government, with public institutions, and private enterprises, which include many of the Fortune 100s. I've worked as a software developer, DevOps and cloud engineer, and an automation engineer during these past 7 years. Before we dive into programming, there's a very important matter that we have to understand. Useful applications not only get the job done, but do it as fast as possible while consuming the minimal amount of resources possible. We don't want to waste energy or materials when we can optimize them. This saves us money and saves the planet. There are 4 main resources that our devices provide us that we have to consider when building any application. These are the CPU, RAM, disk, and network. They can affect us in many ways, from making our application run slowly to plainly not working or crashing. The Central Processing Unit, or CPU, is the brains of our device. Its duty is to execute the instructions that we specify in an application. It is usually comprised of processing units, typically referred to as cores. We can measure how fast this brain works by the amount of cycles or operations that it can process in a second. The random access memory is like the memory cells in our brain. Its duty is to store information on how to do things and data that we need to perform that work. It is a memory that the CPU can read and write to very fast. However, its capacity tends to be relatively small to the amount of data that we use in our days. Just like our brain cells, once it stops working, all the information is lost. We can measure its capacity in bytes and its speed usually in hertz. The hard disk is like a book in a shelf. Its duty is to keep the information available for a long time, as long as it is not damaged. Its shortcoming is that it is slow to obtain and store information in it, as it involves physical movement of a needle on top of a magnetic disk. We can measure its capacity in bytes and its speed in revolutions per minute. The network card is the last important consideration we must keep in mind. Its duty is to communicate with other devices in a network. These devices might have information that we need to properly perform our tasks. We can measure its speed in bits per second. PHP stands for PHP Hypertext Preprocessor. It is an open source project by the PHP group, currently in its 8th release. It is a scripting language that is used in 80% of all web servers today. Its files usually have the extension .php. Most PHP instructions can be moved to a different operating system or web server, and it will still work as long as the correct PHP version is installed. The PHP instructions get executed on the server when a web request is received. The language was specifically designed for the web, but it can be used in the command line interface too. PHP is a good option because it is pretty fast and it doesn't waste resources. You can easily scale your application by adding more servers with the same code. There are no licensing fees to pay. It has object-oriented functionality, which helps maintain the codebase. And it has native connectivity to multiple database systems. In our next lesson, we will cover how to install and use XAMPP and Visual Studio Code. XAMPP is the development platform that we will use to run our PHP files. Visual Studio Code is the development environment that we will use to write our PHP code. And they can both be downloaded in the links below. Thank you for being here. I hope that this course helps you grow as a person and a professional. See you on the next lesson.